There is a kind of darkness that the sighted never truly know. Not the darkness of a room with the lights off, where shapes still linger at the edges, and the memory of sight fills in the gaps. Not the darkness of a closed door, or a moonless night, or eyes pressed shut against something difficult to witness. The darkness Mara Voss knew was complete. It had been complete since the hour of her birth, when the moon goddess had given her everything. Bone and breath, and a wolf that would one day be extraordinary. And withheld with what Mara had come to think of as deliberate intention, the one thing the Silvermark Pack considered most essential. Sight. By every law the Pack observed, she should have been left at the edge of the territory at age 5. The old way, the efficient way. A blind wolf could not hunt, could not fight, could not contribute to a pack whose survival had always depended on physical strength and the ability to read a landscape at speed. She was, by every metric the elders applied, a liability. She had survived anyway, not through grace, not through the intervention of a sympathetic alpha or a council member moved by conscience. She had survived because her grandmother, a fierce, small woman named Della, who had buried 2 mates and 3 of her own children, and developed, through those losses, a comprehensive contempt for the concept of giving up, had looked at 5-year-old Mara and said, "You will learn to be indispensable." And then she had set about making this true with the systematic focus of someone building a fortress. Herbs, anatomy, the particular chemistry of wolf physiology. How silver interacted with the healing factor. How wolfsbane suppressed the shift. How fever moved through a shifter body differently than a human one. Faster and hotter, and resolved with a violence that could kill as easily as cure, if not managed correctly. Mara had learned all of it. She had learned it the way blind people learn everything. Not by seeing it, but by building a map inside her mind, so detailed and precise that she could navigate it in complete darkness at any speed. By the time she was 12, she could identify 17 varieties of wolfsbane by scent alone. By 15, she could stitch a wound in total darkness faster than the senior healer could manage in full light. By 23, she was the most capable healer in the Silvermark Pack, by a margin so significant it had become impolite to mention it, because mentioning it would require acknowledging that they had spent 18 years nearly leaving her at the edge of the territory. Nobody thanked her for any of it. "Move," warriors would say, their bodies generating enough displaced air as they passed that she felt it against her cheek before she heard their footsteps. Omega coming through, someone would announce at the feast table, as if her presence required advance warning, as if the other pack members needed time to prepare themselves for the inconvenience of her existence. Mara had learned, over 23 years, to fold herself very small, to exist in the margins, to take up precisely as much space as the work required, and no more. The basement ward of the Silvermark Fortress was hers in the way that inconvenient spaces belong to inconvenient people. By default, without ceremony, because nobody else wanted it. The room was low-ceilinged and perpetually cool, cut into the rock foundation of the building, accessible by a narrow staircase that the pack's senior healers had never once descended voluntarily. It smelled of dried herbs and poultice and the particular mineral sharpness of underground stone. It had no windows. Mara loved it unreservedly. She knew every inch of it, every shelf, every supply, every instrument laid in its exact position and returned to that position after every use, because in her world, a misplaced scalpel was not an inconvenience, but a potential catastrophe. She moved through the space the way water moves through a familiar channel. Without hesitation, without error, with the economy of something that has learned its path so completely, the path has become part of it. She knew other things too, things she had never been invited to offer. She knew, for instance, that Alpha King Cale Blackwood walked the East Corridor every morning at the same hour. She had catalogued his footsteps over 3 years. The particular rhythm of them, the slight heaviness of the left boot heel, that told a story of old damage and incomplete healing. She knew that he paused on the landing above the basement ward staircase, sometimes, a beat longer than a passing step required. She had never understood why. She had never asked. You did not ask things like that when you were the blind Omega in the basement ward. She had simply noted it, the way she noted everything, and stored it in the detailed map she kept of people who moved through this fortress. It was the only tool she had that no one had ever thought to take from her. On the night the siege began, she was in the basement ward grinding dried silver fern root into a neutralizing powder, a task that required attention and produced a scent so sharp it made her eyes water, which she had always found quietly amusing. She heard the siege before anyone came to tell her about it. The particular resonance of an assault on stone walls was different from any other sound the fortress produced. A deep, rhythmic percussion that moved through the rock itself, arriving at the soles of her feet before it reached her ears. She set down the grinding stone. She listened. She counted the impact intervals and identified the assault pattern from the texts her grandmother had made her memorize. Not a direct breach attempt, a distributed pressure assault, designed to fracture attention and force the defenders to spread thin. They would be pulling every available warrior to the upper levels. She went to her supply shelves and began preparing for the injuries that were coming. She was not afraid. Fear was a luxury that required the belief that your situation could get meaningfully worse, and Mara had spent 23 years at the bottom of the pack hierarchy, with no real prospect of descent. The siege was simply a new problem. She was very good at problems. The door at the top of the staircase burst open 40 minutes into the assault. Heavy footsteps, one set moving urgently, one set dragging, irregular, the pattern of someone being supported rather than walking independently. Mara had the examination table cleared and prepared before they reached the bottom of the stairs, moving by the sound of their descent. "You." The voice belonged to a warrior she identified by his particular combination of boot weight and breathing pattern as Gareth, a senior enforcer, mid-40s, dependable. His voice was stripped of its usual authority and replaced with something raw. "You're all that's left down here. He's dying. I need you to do something." Mara had already crossed the room. Her hands found the patient before Gareth finished lowering him to the table. Found him, and immediately began the rapid assessment. She could perform faster by touch than most healers performed by sight. Male. Large, muscle-dense, the build of someone who had spent decades in physical training. Pulse at the throat, present, but wrong. Too slow, too thin. The texture of a heartbeat running out of argument. And something else, something she had not expected. She knew this heartbeat, not from treatment. She had never treated him, had never been given the opportunity. But she had listened to it through stone and wood for 3 years, measured it at the distance of a corridor, catalogued its rhythm the way she catalogued everything. The particular steady pace of it, the way it slowed on cold mornings, the pause on the landing above her stairs. Alpha King Kale. She did not allow herself a reaction. There was no room for reaction. There was only the work, clothing soaked through. She found the first arrow by feel, and felt the cold that radiated from its shaft, even through the fabric. Silver-tipped, the wolf's healing factor would be completely paralyzed. Every second the metal remained in the body, the toxin spread further through the tissue, shutting down the regenerative response that was the only thing standing between a badly injured wolf and death. She had perhaps 20 minutes before the damage became irreversible, possibly less. "Hold him still," Mara said. "You're—" Gareth started. "Blind, yes." She was already working, her fingers tracing the angle of the first arrow with the careful precision of someone reading text. "You're bleeding from a severed artery in your left shoulder. I can smell it. You have approximately 4 minutes before blood loss takes you off your feet. I suggest you use them to hold his shoulders down." A pause. Then Gareth's hands came down on the patient's shoulders. The first arrow came out cleanly. A good angle, no secondary tearing. The wound sealing around her fingers as she withdrew it. The body's desperate attempt to manage damage, even with the silver suppressing full healing. She packed it immediately with the neutralizing poultice and moved to the second. The second was more complicated. It had entered at an angle suggesting the patient had been partially turned when it struck, which meant the tip had traveled along an unintended path through the muscle tissue. She spent 30 seconds, which felt considerably longer, repositioning her fingers to find the correct extraction angle without widening the wound. The patient made no sound. She noticed this. Most people, even trained warriors, made some sound during this kind of procedure. The absence of sound was either unconsciousness or an extraordinary degree of controlled endurance. The pulse under her left hand, which she was monitoring continuously, suggested the former. The third arrow was the one that had been trying to kill him. She felt it. The proximity to the left ventricle. The arrow tip resting against the membrane with the specific terrible intimacy of something that had just barely not gone far enough. Half an inch further, and she would be preparing a body rather than treating a patient. She understood immediately that extracting this one required working blind inside the wound cavity with 2 fingers, feeling for the tip against the tissue, identifying the exact angle of removal that would bring it free without nicking the membrane it was pressing against. She did not allow herself to consider the possibility of failure. Gareth passed out midway through the third arrow. She heard him go. The sudden heaviness of his body meeting the floor, the altered quality of the room's silence without his breathing. She kept working. The pulse under her left hand faltered. Stopped. Mara pressed her palm flat against his sternum. She had learned the echo touch from her grandmother, who had learned it from hers. A healer's technique older than any pack law. The practice of pushing one's own vital energy against a failing heart and insisting, with everything you had, that it remember what it was for. It was not magic. It was not mystical. It was simply the oldest knowledge she carried, and she gave it everything, his heart answered. She found the angle she needed. She extracted the third arrow in one controlled motion. The wound closed around her withdrawal with the particular violence of a body that has been waiting, suppressed and desperate, for permission to begin healing. She packed the wound. She applied the neutralizing compound to all 3 sites. She checked the pulse. Slow, still too slow, but present and strengthening by degrees, the silver's influence receding as her compounds went to work. Then she sat down on the floor. Her hands, which had been steady through the entire procedure, with the steadiness of someone who had trained that steadiness for years, and knew that nothing, not fear, not urgency, not the specific terror of a heartbeat stopping under her palm, was allowed to compromise it, finally let go. They shook. She pressed them flat against the cold stone floor, and breathed and let them shake, and said nothing about it to the empty room. She was alone with the patient. She pressed 2 fingers to his wrist. Pulse, steady now, slow, but steady and strengthening. The silver compounds were working. His healing factor, released from suppression, was waking up with the particular aggressive energy of something that had been forcibly restrained. She allowed herself one breath of relief. Then she heard the footsteps. Not Gareth. He was still on the floor, his breathing the slow, even rhythm of genuine unconsciousness. Not a warrior. The footsteps from the staircase were too light, too measured, too careful. The footsteps of someone who had been trained to move quietly, and was making a particular effort to move more quietly than usual. The footsteps of someone who did not want to be heard. Mara's hand found the scalpel beside her knee without looking. The door opened. Well, the voice was smooth and expensive. The voice of someone who had grown up in a house where the floors were always swept by someone else. I see the little blind mouse found herself a king to play with. Mara placed the voice before the sentence finished. She had heard it 3 times in the past year. At pack functions she attended in her capacity as healer, functions where her presence was tolerated rather than welcomed, where she had stood in corners and listened to everything. Senna Dreven, high-born wolf from the Eastern Reach, betrothed to the Alpha King by a contract that had been signed before he was old enough to have a meaningful opinion about it. She smelled of white orchids, expensive skin oil, and underneath both, a faint copper edge that Mara associated with stress hormones and acute, calculated attention. She did not smell of fear. "He needs rest," Mara said. She did not stand up. She did not put down the scalpel. "He needs to be moved," Senna replied. Her footsteps advanced into the room, controlled, not hesitant. To the lower tunnels, away from the assault line. She paused. "Away from you." Mara listened to the pause. She listened to what lived inside it. Senna's heartbeat was elevated, not panicked, not the rhythm of a person frightened for a loved one's safety. It was the tight, rapid beat of someone in the middle of a calculation, someone who had arrived at this room with a plan and was currently assessing whether the plan needed adjustment. "You could have sent a warrior," Mara said carefully. "The fortress has warriors to spare for escort duties, even during an assault. Instead, you came yourself, alone, during the siege." She let the observation settle. "Why?" "Give me the scalpel," Senna said. "No." The word arrived in the room like something solid. Mara felt the shift, the slight change in air pressure that meant Senna had taken a step toward her. She rose to her feet in one motion. She turned to face the direction of the breathing, the scalpel held low at her side, her body settling into a stance her grandmother had taught her 20 years ago for exactly this category of situation. "I cannot see you," Mara said, "but I can hear that your heart rate changes every time I speak, and I can hear—" She tilted her head, extending every sense she had toward the examination table. "That your patient is awake." The silence that followed was the silence of a room in which everyone had just recalibrated. From the table, a voice arrived. Low, stripped of everything except the absolute minimum required to produce sound. "She's right." Senna's composure cracked. Not dramatically, not with a scream or an outburst, but in the specific way that a very controlled person cracks when the ground shifts beneath a plan they had considered airtight. Mara heard it in the breath, the sharp intake, the half-second where Senna's heartbeat jumped from calculated to something raw. Then the calculation returned. "This is not finished," Senna said. Her voice had dropped to something that was not quite a threat, and not quite a promise. It occupied the space between the two, where the most dangerous things lived. "You have interfered with something you do not understand. Both of you." Mara said nothing. She stood with the scalpel at her side and listened to Senna's heartbeat, and waited. The silence stretched. Senna left. Not quickly. Not the retreat of someone caught and panicking. She withdrew with the controlled pace of a person who has decided that this particular approach is no longer viable, and is already thinking about the next one. Her footsteps on the staircase were as measured going up as they had been coming down. The door at the top of the stairs closed, but before it did, Mara heard one last thing, the sound of Senna speaking, not into the room, not to anyone present, but to someone else. A single low word in a direction that meant the corridor, that meant a person waiting outside the ward, a person who had been placed there and given instructions. The word was, "Wait." Mara set the scalpel back on the shelf and turned toward the examination table. "She is not gone," Mara said. "She has people in the corridor." "How long?" the Alpha asked. His voice was rough, shredded by pain and effort. But it was present, and it was controlled. Minutes. She was already reassessing the room. Supplies, exits, what she had and what she didn't. She did not have many options. The corridor was the only way out, and Senna controlled it. Which means we need to make her calculate that coming back in here costs more than she's willing to spend. She moved to the table and checked his pulse again. Stronger now, the healing factor working in earnest, the silver's influence almost fully neutralized. "Can you sit up?" she asked. A pause, the sound of someone deciding whether the truth was tactically useful. "Slowly," he said. "Then, sit up, slowly. And when she comes back, she needs to see you upright, mobile, and functional. She came down here because she believed you were barely conscious and entirely dependent on a blind Omega with no pack standing. If she recalculates that assumption, she will recalculate the risk." A silence. "You're managing me," he said. "I am keeping us both alive," Mara said. "You can have feelings about the distinction later." She heard something shift in the room. Not physically, the quality of his attention changing. And then, quietly, she heard him almost laugh. It was not the laugh of a man performing ease. It was a surprised sound, involuntary, the kind that escapes before a person's defenses can catch it. She catalogued it the way she catalogued everything. She moved to the supply shelf and began assembling what the next hours would require. "You've memorized every inch of this space," he said. Every inch of every space I've ever worked in, Mara said. It is the first thing I do. She measured dried herbs by touch and scent, her hands moving with the automatic confidence of long practice. When you cannot see where things are, you learn to make certain they are always where you put them. She heard him process this. "The pack should have utilized you better," he said. The words were careful, deliberate, an acknowledgement rather than an apology, which she respected more. "Yes," she said, "they should have." "I've walked past that ward," he said after a moment. "Many times," Mara said. "You walk fast. Your left boot heel strikes the floor harder than your right. Old injury." The gait compensation suggests something that didn't heal quite straight. A long silence. 7 years ago, he said slowly. The Battle of the Northern Fen. The bone reset was incomplete. You've been compensating with the right hip ever since, which is why the lower back gives you difficulty in cold weather. Another silence. Longer. "How do you know about my back?" "I hear you on the stairs on cold mornings," Mara said. 3 extra seconds on each step, sometimes 4. She paused. "I notice things, Alpha. It is the only tool I have that no one has ever thought to take from me." She heard his pulse change. She had catalogued thousands of heartbeats over 23 years. Fear had a particular irregularity to it, a stuttered quality. Anger ran faster and harder, a drumbeat with edges. Grief moved slow and heavy, like something being dragged. Desire she had identified early and learned to categorize without reaction. Because desire was common and responses to it complicated things unnecessarily. What she was hearing from the Alpha King now was none of those things. It was the sound of a person encountering something they had not expected, and finding, in the encounter, something that rearranged the furniture of their understanding. And beneath it, beneath the surprise and the recalibration, something older. Something that moved differently from all the other rhythms she had learned to read. A resonance she did not have a word for, because she had never heard it before, not in 23 years of listening to every heartbeat in this fortress. She filed it carefully. She did not examine it too closely. "Not yet. Senna will come back," she said, returning them both to the problem at hand. "But not immediately. She is adjusting the plan." "Yes." His voice had settled into something more like itself, authority returning, as the pain receded incrementally, the healing factor restoring what the silver had suppressed. "She's been maneuvering for 2 years. Tonight she saw an opportunity." He paused. "I've had suspicions, but suspicion doesn't dissolve a betrothal contract ratified by 3 council members and 2 family seals. And now I have a witness." Mara stood very still. "I carry no rank," she said. "I am an Omega healer in the basement ward. Blind. My testimony before the council would be," she considered the precise word, "dismissed before I finished the first sentence." "That," Cale said, "depends entirely on who is introducing the witness." She heard him move, a controlled repositioning, the sound of someone managing pain with practiced discipline. He crossed the room. He stopped in front of her, close enough that she could feel the warmth of him. The elevated temperature of a body in active, accelerated healing, radiating outward through the skin. He smelled of blood and the chemical sharpness of the silver compounds she'd applied, and beneath both, something else, something she catalogued automatically, and then held still and did not examine too closely. "Give me your hand," he said. Mara hesitated. In 23 years of practicing medicine in the Silvermark Pack, she had touched every part of every person she had ever treated. She had pressed her fingers to pulses and sutured skin, and reset broken bones, and done all of it without hesitation, because that was what the work required. This felt different. She held out her right hand. It was still faintly trembling, the adrenaline of the procedure not yet fully metabolized. His hand closed around hers. Warm, steady, large enough to contain hers completely. The contact sent something through her that she had no medical term for. Not pain, not warmth, exactly. A current. The particular sensation of a lock recognizing a key it had been waiting a very long time for. She kept her face still. She stored the information carefully. "I have walked past your ward," Cale said, "for 3 years. The same ward, the same staircase. And I never once walked down it." He was quiet for a moment. "Tonight I am going to walk into it properly." He paused. "If you'll allow it." Mara's free hand was empty. She had set the scalpel down. She became aware, in the basement of her own awareness, that something had shifted, that the room she had always known as hers, the room nobody else wanted, the room that had always been a consolation prize masquerading as a home, felt different with him in it. Not smaller, larger, not lonelier, less. Outside, the siege continued. The percussion of it reached them through the stone, distant now, the assault pattern shifting. The defenders were holding, redistributing, finding their footing. It would not be over tonight, but the immediate crisis had reached its peak. In the lower tunnels, somewhere between the basement ward and whatever plan she had arrived with, Senna Dreven was thinking. Mara knew this the way she knew most things, not by seeing it, but by understanding the logic of people. Senna had not come to that room out of fear or love or desperate concern for a betrothed's survival. She had come because a severely wounded, barely conscious Alpha King in an isolated room represented an opportunity, and opportunity was the only language Senna appeared to speak fluently. She would come back. Not tonight. The witness variable had complicated the calculation. But she would come back, with something more carefully prepared, in a context where witnesses were less available. Mara needed to think carefully about what happened next. "Alpha," she said. "Cale," he said. She paused. "My name," he said. "Not a title. You've been in this pack for 23 years, and I have never once asked your name, and then had the poor judgment to use it." He paused. "The least I can do is offer mine in exchange." Mara was quiet for a moment. "Cale," she said. The name felt unfamiliar in her mouth, not because she didn't know it. Everyone in the pack knew it. But because she had never had occasion to use it. "You need to understand something about what Senna came here to do, not what she claimed to come here to do. What she actually came here to do. Tell me." "Your heart beat when she entered the room. I was monitoring it. You were barely conscious, but your pulse responded to her presence. Not the way it responds to concern. The way it responds to a threat." She paused. "She came to that room with your scalpel in mind. Not a warrior escort. Not medical assistance. The scalpel. She came alone. She came quietly. And she asked me for the one instrument in this room capable of making a silver wound look like a surgical complication." He was quiet for a long time. "You knew all of this," he said finally. "In the moment, I heard her heartbeat," Mara said simply. "People perform many things with their faces and their voices. Nobody has ever learned to perform their heartbeat." Another long silence. She thought of the 3 arrows, of the third one, resting against the membrane of his heart with the precise, terrible patience of something that had almost done its job. She thought of the timing, the siege beginning exactly when it needed to begin, to pull every senior healer away from the fortress, leaving the Alpha King's medical care in the hands of the one person nobody would think to account for. This was not, she understood, an opportunistic assassination attempt. This was planned. "Kale," she said, "the siege tonight. Did it begin the way sieges from the Eastern Reach usually begin?" He was still. She felt the quality of his stillness change. "No," he said. "The assault pattern was—" He stopped. It was distributed, designed to stretch the defense perimeter, pull the warriors thin, clear the interior. "Clear the interior," Mara said. "Not breach it. Clear it." Another silence. "She didn't need an external force to reach me," Kale said slowly. "She only needed everyone else to be somewhere else." "The siege," Mara said, "was the distraction. You were the target." The room was very quiet. The percussion of the assault above them had shifted to a lower, more sustainable rhythm. The sound of a siege that had achieved its secondary objective and was now maintaining pressure without committing to resolution. It would maintain that pressure, she realized, until word came from inside. Word that would not now be coming. "How long?" Kale asked. "Until my healing factor has me mobile. At current pace, 2 hours for basic function, 4 for anything I would describe as reliable." She paused. "You should not be mobile for 12. She paused again. "You will attempt mobile in 2, regardless. 4, he said. "I can give you 4. She appreciated this negotiation. It suggested he was already thinking past the immediate crisis, which was a good sign in a patient whose heart had stopped twice in the past hour. "In 4 hours," she said carefully, "you will need to address the Council. You will need to address the Siege Command, and you will need to address Senna Draven in a context where whatever she attempts next can be witnessed by people whose testimony cannot be dismissed." "Yes, I can help you with the medical component of that timeline," Mara said. She hesitated. "The rest is—" She stopped. "Outside her usual area of expertise," he offered. "Yes." He was quiet for a moment. Then, "What is your area of expertise, exactly, beyond the obvious?" She considered the question. "People," she said finally. "I have spent 23 years being invisible in this pack. Invisible people hear things. They observe things. They build a very detailed understanding of how the people around them actually work, as opposed to how those people present themselves." She paused. "I know things about this pack, and the people in it, and the alliances between them, that I suspect your intelligence operation would find useful, and you've never offered this information before." "No one has ever asked," Mara said, "and I have learned, over time, to wait to be asked rather than offer what isn't wanted." Another silence, different in quality from the others. "I'm asking," Kale said. She heard something shift in the room. Not physically. The way a season shifts. Not in one moment, but in the accumulated weight of moments reaching a point where the change becomes undeniable. "Then we have 4 hours," she said, "and I suggest we use them." She moved to the supply shelf and began assembling what the next 4 hours would require. The compounds that would accelerate his healing without overtaxing the system. The treatments that would address the silver toxin's residual effects. The very specific combination of herbs that her grandmother had called the waking blend, which had never been formally documented because the senior healers had always dismissed her grandmother's methods as Omega superstition. Their loss. She was 3 hours into the 4 when the complication arrived. She heard the footsteps first, multiple, moving with coordinated precision. The sound of a trained team rather than individuals. At least 6, approaching the staircase from the corridor above, with the specific pattern of people who had been given a destination and a purpose, and were not planning to negotiate about either. Senna had been faster than she expected, or more accurate, Senna had already had this prepared. The siege, the assassins, the backup plan. All of it assembled in advance, all of it contingent on the first attempt succeeding, with a secondary measure in place for the possibility that it didn't. "We have company," Mara said quietly. 6, possibly 8. Trained, coming now. "How long?" Cale asked. He was already moving. She heard him swing his legs off the table, heard the controlled hiss of pain that accompanied it. 90 seconds. She was already at the supply shelves, her hands moving quickly. She heard him stand. She heard his body find its balance. Not full strength, not even close, but present. Functional. "Is there another way out of this room?" he asked. "No." She handed him something. Her fingers found his hand in the dark and pressed the object into it. "A scalpel," he said. "The largest one," she said. "I suggest you hold it like you intend to use it and let them wonder." She felt, rather than saw, the quality of his attention shift. "You're not afraid," he said. "I live in a basement room that nobody else wanted," Mara said. "I have been invisible in this pack for 23 years, she turned toward the staircase. "I have spent my entire life being underestimated," she paused. "Tonight I find I am thoroughly tired of it." The door at the top of the stairs opened. 6 operatives came down. Not pack warriors, hired wolves, the kind with no loyalty to the Silvermark crest. The kind that Senna would have sourced through the Eastern Reach trade routes. Mara identified them by what they lacked, the familiar gait patterns of people she had treated, the particular boot sounds of the fortress guards. These were strangers, strangers with weapons. She could smell the silver in the blades before they reached the bottom step. She did not announce herself. She did not wait for them to find their footing in the unfamiliar room. She reached for the shelf she knew better than she knew her own hands. She found the jar of silver fern powder. Ground fine, concentrated, the same mixture she used in small doses to flush silver toxin from wounds. In large quantities, breathed in directly, temporarily blinding. Temporarily, because the wolf healing factor would clear it within minutes. But minutes were what she needed. She threw the jar. The sound that followed was the sound of 6 trained operatives encountering a problem their briefing had not covered. Coughing, boots on stone, disoriented. The clatter of a dropped blade. Cale moved. She heard him move, not at full strength, not the fluid, deadly efficiency she suspected he was capable of when fully healed, but something close enough. The disciplined, controlled force of a man who had trained his body so completely that even at 60%, it was more than sufficient for the work required. It was over in less than 2 minutes. Mara stood in the center of the room. She knew by heart while the dust settled. Her hands empty, her pulse elevated but controlled. She listened to the room reassemble itself around her. The groaning of subdued bodies, the shift of stone, the particular quality of silence that meant the threat had been neutralized. "You're bleeding," she said. "Left forearm. The blade got through." "I know," Cale said. His voice was rough with exertion. "Come here." He came. She found his arm in the dark. She did not need light, and she did not ask for it. And she assessed the wound by touch, and began closing it with the focused efficiency of someone who had been doing this in darkness her entire life. He stood very still and let her work. When she was done, neither of them spoke for a moment. "Sera will not send another team tonight," Cale said finally. "She will know this failed. She will regroup and approach the council first. Try to establish the narrative before I can." "Then we need to get to the council first," Mara said. The Pack Council convened at dawn. Mara had never been in the council chamber before. She had treated council members. She had treated nearly everyone in the fortress at one point or another. But she had never been admitted to the chamber itself, which was reserved for the Pack's decision-making body and the individuals they chose to consult. She stood to Cale's right. She felt the quality of the room's attention the moment she entered it, the specific silence of people who had not expected her to be where she was and were deciding what to do with the information. She was accustomed to this silence. She had been navigating versions of it her entire life. "Let the record show," Cale said, without preamble, without the usual procedural opening, without allowing the council time to establish the frame that suited them. "Let the record show that the Alpha King of the Silvermark Pack is alive, because Mara Voss is better at her work than anyone in this room has ever acknowledged." He paused. "Let the record further show that this will not continue." General Aldrich, the senior council member, cleared his throat. "Alpha. The question of the betrothal contract." "The betrothal contract is void," Cale said. "The legal basis." "The legal basis is the attempted assassination of the Alpha King, coordinated by the betrothed party, using a foreign assault as cover and Pack resources as mechanism." Cale's voice was perfectly even. "I have a witness to the attempt. I have the physical evidence of the assault pattern. Distributed, designed to clear the interior rather than breach it. I have a healer whose medical testimony will establish that the wounds I sustained were targeted with specific knowledge of their effect on silver-exposed Pack physiology." He paused. "And I have 23 years of Pack intelligence that I was not aware I possessed, which I am now aware of, because the person who possesses it has agreed to share it with me." The council was very quiet. Mara felt General Aldrich's attention move to her. She faced the direction of it. "The healer," he said slowly. "The blind one." "Mara Voss," she said. "Yes, you claim to have observed." "I don't claim anything," Mara said. "I heard Senna Dreven's heartbeat when she entered the ward. I identified the pattern of an assassination attempt in progress. I intervened." She paused. "I have been present in this fortress for 23 years. I have treated every person in this room at least once. I have heard, in those 23 years, a very great deal that was said in front of me on the assumption that I was either not listening or not worth accounting for." She let the silence sit for a moment. "I have been listening. I have been worth accounting for. Both of these things have always been true." The council chamber was quiet in a way that had a different quality from the quiet that had greeted her entrance. Cale spoke into it. "The question before this council is not whether to accept my healer's testimony. Her testimony is accepted. The question is what the Silvermark Pack intends to do, going forward, with the resources it has been mismanaging since the year this woman was born. Another silence. Longer. Aldrich cleared his throat again, and this time it sounded less like a procedural formality, and more like a man adjusting to a new weight. "What would you have us do, Alpha?" he said carefully. "To begin with," Cale said, and Mara heard the precise, controlled quality in his voice that suggested he had been thinking about this for longer than the past few hours. "You will address her correctly, which is to say, you will address her as the Pack healer, not the basement healer, not the Omega, not the blind one." He paused. "Her name is Mara Voss, and she is the most capable person in this fortress, and this Pack is going to start behaving as if that is true, because it is true, and it has always been true, and we have wasted 23 years pretending otherwise." The council meeting lasted 4 hours. Mara testified for 2 of them. She spoke carefully and precisely, the way she did everything, and she said what she knew and attributed it correctly, and did not embellish and did not minimize, and she watched, through the instrument of her hearing, which was more reliable than she suspected any of them understood. The room's collective understanding shift, degree by degree, from the understanding they had arrived with to something more accurate. It was not comfortable for them. She did not require it to be comfortable. She only required it to be true. When it was over, when the council had dispersed and the decisions had been made, the betrothal contract voided on grounds of treason, the Eastern Reach Alliance dissolved pending investigation, the siege formally ended with a surrender negotiated by forces Senna could no longer coordinate. Mara sat in the council chamber with her hands folded in her lap and listened to the fortress settling around her. Cale sat beside her. She heard him before she felt him, the particular weight of his presence in a room, the sound of someone who had carried authority so long they had forgotten it was a thing being carried. "You are exhausted," he said. "Yes," Mara said. "So am I." They sat in the quiet of the chamber. Outside, the fortress was beginning the complicated business of recovery. The sounds of warriors accounting for the night's damage, of supply chains being assessed, of a community that had survived something difficult beginning, cautiously, to believe it had survived it. "I owe you more than I know how to address properly," Cale said. "You don't owe me anything," Mara said. "I did what the work required." "That is not what I mean," he said. She understood what he meant. She had understood it for some hours. She was choosing to address it carefully, because careful was the only approach she knew for things that mattered. "What you mean," she said, "requires more than one conversation." "Yes," he said. "It does," she considered. "A great many things have been decided tonight. The betrothal, the alliance, the council's understanding of my testimony." She paused. "I would prefer the remaining things to be decided." She searched for the correct word. "Slowly." He was quiet for a moment. "Slowly," he said. "Yes," he paused. "I've been moving fast for a long time. It hasn't always produced good results." "No," Mara agreed. "It hasn't." She thought of 3 extra seconds on each step on a cold morning, the gait that had never quite corrected, the things that didn't heal properly when they were rushed. She stood. She picked up her cane and her bag. "The ward," she said, "needs to be restocked. The assault produced casualties that my supplies are no longer adequate to address." She paused. "I will need assistance moving materials from the senior stores to the basement level. It would be," she chose the word deliberately, "appropriate if that assistance came from someone with the authority to authorize the transfer." She heard him stand. "I believe," he said. "I can arrange that." She heard the quality of his voice, the careful, specific warmth of someone who was moving at a different pace than they were accustomed to, and finding, in the slowing, something they had not expected to find. She turned toward the door. "Cale," she said. She did not turn back. "Yes." "The landing, at the top of my stairs." She paused. 3 years of pausing there. She let the words settle. "You were always welcome to come down." A silence. It was a long silence. Not uncomfortable. The kind of silence that has something in it, that is not empty but full. The way a room feels when someone who matters to it has just walked in. "I know that now," he said. She walked to the door. She let her cane find the threshold she knew by feel, the precise worn groove in the stone that marked the boundary between the council chamber and the corridor beyond. She had taken the basement ward for 23 years because nobody else wanted it, because it was hers by default, by margin, by the gift of being consistently overlooked. It had always been enough. She understood now, moving through the council chamber door with her cane and her bag, and 23 years of being the most capable person in the room, that it was going to become something more. Not because she needed it to be, because it had always been, and she had always known it. And the fortress was finally, slowly, imperfectly, in the way that large things change, beginning to know it too. One word, just one. Whatever this story is making you feel right now, drop it in the comments. And while you're there, tell me where in the world you're listening from, and what time it is where you are. Because I have a feeling some of you are supposed to be asleep right now. And behind her, she heard his footsteps follow. Not quickly, not at the pace of a man who had somewhere else to be. Slowly, deliberately, at exactly the pace she was walking. The dark had never frightened her, but she found, walking up the stairs toward the long dawn light, beginning at the corridor windows, that the light was not unwelcome either, and this time she did not walk toward it alone.